Welcome to the channel, Fear of Darkness. Today's story is set in the year 1859. An enslaved giant woman was saved from death by a black boy, and what followed was impossible, bizarre, and inexplicable. This is an intense, difficult story. So breathe, take a moment, and listen closely. Before we start, subscribe to the channel and comment which city and country you're listening from. Your participation ensures these stories are remembered, not buried. Let's begin. On the night of September 14, 1859, in the swamps of Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana, a woman stood prepared to be burned alive. She was 8 feet tall. She weighed over 300 pounds, and to the men who owned her, she was worth exactly nothing. But watching from the cypress trees, hidden behind Spanish moss, was a 17-year-old boy about to change everything. His name was Isaac Mercer. What he did that night was so against every law of man and nature, so unlikely and impossible, that for over a century, historians refuse to believe it happened. This is the true story of a young man who saved a giant, and how that giant, in her final days, taught him what freedom truly meant. Louisiana in 1859 was a different world. Different not just from today, but from anywhere else on earth. The Mississippi River Delta spread like a giant hand's fingers across the land, creating a maze of waterways, swamps, and fertile soil that grew more cotton than anywhere else in America. In that single year, Louisiana plantations shipped over 700,000 bales of cotton to mills in England and New England. Each bale weighed 400 pounds. Every pound required human hands to plant, tend, pick, and pack. Those hands belonged to enslaved people. Over 300,000 of them lived and worked in Louisiana in 1859. They had no rights. They had no freedom. Their future was only what their owners decided. Under Louisiana law, they were not people. They were property, like horses or furniture, to be bought, sold, used, and discarded. The Bellamy Plantation sat 12 miles north of Homer in the heart of sugarcane country. It covered nearly 2,000 acres of rich black soil, worked by 147 enslaved men, women, and children. The owner was Cornelius Bellamy, a third-generation planter whose grandfather came from Virginia in 1792 with 12 enslaved people and a dream of empire. That empire now produced over 800 hogsheads of sugar every year. Each hogshead held 1,000 pounds. At 1859's price of 6 cents per pound, the Bellamy plantation generated nearly $50,000 in annual revenue, more money than most Americans would see in 10 lifetimes. Isaac Mercer was born on this plantation in the spring of 1842. His mother, Ruth, worked in the main house as a cook and seamstress. His father was unknown, though whispers in the slave quarters suggested he might have been one of the Bellamy sons who died of yellow fever in 1851. From his mother, Isaac inherited a sharp mind and a quiet nature. He also inherited something far more dangerous, curiosity. From the time he could walk, Isaac watched everything. He watched the overseers count bales. He watched the bookkeeper make marks in his ledger. He watched the Bellamy children on the porch with their tutors, learning to read, write, and cipher, and he memorized all he saw. By age 10, Isaac had taught himself to recognize letters. By 12, he could sound out simple words. By 15, he stole moments with discarded newspapers and old almanacs, piecing together the mystery of written language, one fragment at a time. This was a crime punishable by whipping, mutilation, or death. Louisiana law made it illegal to teach enslaved people to read. The punishment for a white person teaching literacy was a fine up to $500 and possible imprisonment. For an enslaved person learning to read, punishment was left to the owner's discretion, often whatever cruelty they wished to inflict. Isaac knew the risk. He hid his knowledge, even from his mother. He pretended to be slow and simple, the kind of young man white people overlooked. He made himself invisible. And invisible people, he discovered, could go anywhere and see anything. By 17, Isaac had grown tall and strong with broad shoulders and hands calloused from labor. He worked the fields during harvest and in the stables the rest of the year. The overseers considered him reliable but unremarkable, exactly what he wanted. Behind his quiet exterior, his mind never stopped, absorbing information, planning for a future that seemed impossible but that he refused to stop imagining. The woman they called the giantess arrived at the Bellamy plantation in the summer of 1857. Isaac was 15. He was helping unload a wagon when he saw her for the first time, and the sight stopped him cold. She sat in the back of an open cart, legs folded because there was no room to stretch them. Even sitting, her head rose higher than the driver's. Her skin was dark as river mud, and her eyes held a weariness Isaac had never seen before, not even in the oldest field hands who had worked a lifetime under the Louisiana sun. The driver was Patterson, a slave trader from New Orleans who specialized in unusual merchandise. People came from across the South to buy from him when they wanted something different: albinos, twins, people with extra fingers or missing limbs, and giants. Patterson announced to Cornelius Bellamy that the woman measured 8 feet, 1 inch tall. He claimed she was the tallest woman in the Americas, maybe the world. Bellamy circled the wagon slowly, examining her as he would a horse or a piece of furniture. He complained she looked half dead. Patterson admitted she was tired from the 3-week journey from Virginia but insisted she was stronger than any 2 men. The negotiation lasted 20 minutes. They settled on $350, plus Patterson's room and board for the night. The deal was sealed with a handshake. The woman was now Bellamy plantation property. That night, Isaac's mother told him the woman's real story. The enslaved people had their own information networks, faster and more reliable than any newspaper. Within hours of her arrival, Ruth knew everything. Her real name was Adaze. She was not from Virginia. She was from Igbo land on the coast of West Africa, in what is now southeastern Nigeria. She was captured at age 12 during a village raid and sold to Portuguese traders who shipped her across the Atlantic in a slave ship's belly. Of the 400 who began that journey, only 216 survived. Adaze's height came from her bloodline. Her father was a chief, her mother, a priestess. In her village, tall stature was a sign of divine favor. The tallest became warriors, leaders, intermediaries between the human and spirit worlds. Adaze had been destined for greatness. Instead, she became property. For 20 years, she was passed from owner to owner. Some bought her as a curiosity to show off at parties. Some rented her to traveling shows and circuses where white people paid to gawk. Some tried to breed her, hoping to produce more giants to sell at premium prices. None of her children inherited her height. All were taken from her before they were old enough to remember her face. By the time she reached the Bellamy plantation, Adaze had stopped speaking. She had stopped hoping. She had stopped being a person in any way that mattered to herself. She was simply waiting to die. Cornelius Bellamy had plans for her. He saw profit where others saw burden. The fall social season was approaching, and planters from across Louisiana would gather for parties, balls, and business deals. A genuine African giantess would be the talk of every gathering. Bellamy could charge admission to see her. He could rent her out for special events. He could make back his investment 10 times over. For the first few months, his plan worked. Adaze became famous across Terrebonne Parish. People traveled from as far as New Orleans to see the giant woman. Bellamy dressed her in fine clothes specially made in Baton Rouge. He taught her to bow, curtsy, and perform simple tricks. He made her lift heavy objects and carry men on her shoulders like children. But fame has a short memory, and curiosity fades quickly. By summer 1858, the crowds dwindled. By fall, they stopped coming altogether. Adaze was no longer a novelty. She was just an expensive mouth to feed. That winter, her health began to fail. She developed a persistent cough. Her joints swelled and ached. She could no longer lift what she once carried. The plantation doctor examined her and delivered his verdict: her heart was giving out. People of unusual size often suffered this fate; their bodies could not sustain themselves. He gave her a year, perhaps 2 if she rested. But rest was not permitted for the enslaved. Bellamy put her to work in the sugar mill, where her height let her reach machinery others could not. She worked 18-hour days during grinding season, feeding cane into crushers while furnaces roared and syrup boiled. The work broke her down faster than predicted. By summer 1859, Adaze could barely walk. She spent most of her time in a small cabin at the edge of the slave quarters, too weak to work, but too valuable to simply let die. Bellamy discussed his options with his overseer, Silas Crenshaw. The doctor bills were mounting. The special food she required was expensive. She was costing more than she was worth. The solution was simple, though unspoken in polite company. Louisiana law technically required owners to provide basic care for the enslaved. But the law also looked away when enslaved people had accidents, when they wandered into the swamp and disappeared, when they fell suddenly ill and died before a doctor could be sent for. On the night of September 14, 1859, Silas Crenshaw and 4 other men loaded Adaze onto a cart and drove her into the bayou. They told anyone who asked they were taking her to a healer in the next parish. But the cart was loaded with lamp oil and firewood, and the men carried torches, not medicine. Isaac saw them go. He was supposed to be asleep in his mother's cabin, but he had sneaked out to retrieve a book hidden near the smokehouse. From the shadows, he watched the cart roll past, and he saw Adaze's face in the moonlight. She looked at him. Their eyes met for a moment. And in that moment, something passed between them that Isaac could never explain. He followed them. He didn't decide to, his feet simply moved. He stayed in the shadows, using every trick learned in 17 years of invisibility. He moved from tree to tree, bush to bush, always downwind, always silent. The men were not careful. They didn't expect anyone to follow. They laughed and passed a whiskey bottle as they drove deeper into the swamp. After about an hour, they stopped in a clearing near the water's edge. Isaac crept behind a fallen cypress log. From there, he saw everything. The men pulled Adaze off the cart and threw her to the ground. She did not resist. She did not cry out. She lay in the mud, her enormous body curled like a child's, waiting. Crenshaw stood over her with a torch, announcing that Bellamy wanted it to look like an accident, but that out here, nobody would find anything but bones. One of the other men, a young overseer named Davis, looked uneasy. He questioned if this was right, since she had done nothing wrong. Crenshaw dismissed him, arguing she was eating food and taking up space without giving back. He claimed they were doing her a favor, putting her out of her misery. They piled firewood around her. They soaked it with lamp oil. The smell filled the clearing, sharp, chemical, and wrong. Adaze still did not move. Her eyes were open, staring at the sky through the canopy. Isaac thought he saw her lips moving, maybe praying, maybe saying goodbye. Crenshaw lifted his torch and asked if she had any last words. She did not answer. She did not even look at him. Crenshaw drew back his arm to throw the torch, and Isaac Mercer stepped from the shadows. He didn't know why he did it. He had no plan. He was 17, strong but unarmed, facing 5 grown men with torches, knives, and guns. Nothing was logical about it, but he stepped forward anyway. The men spun, reaching for their weapons. When they saw it was just a young slave from the plantation, they relaxed slightly. Crenshaw actually laughed. He asked what Isaac was doing out here, if he was lost. Isaac's mind raced. He needed a lie, a reason to be there that wouldn't get him killed. He told them Mr. Bellamy had sent him, that the master had changed his mind and wanted her brought back. Crenshaw's eyes narrowed with suspicion. He asked why Bellamy would send a slave with such a message instead of house staff. Isaac explained everyone else was asleep, and Bellamy didn't want to wake them, he wanted it kept quiet. Davis and another man exchanged glances. It was plausible. Bellamy was known for strange whims and obsessive secrecy. He hated his business becoming public gossip. But Crenshaw wasn't convinced. He stepped closer to Isaac, holding the torch near the young man's face. He accused Isaac of lying, he could see it in his eyes. Isaac didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that flinching made things worse. He insisted Bellamy was waiting at the house and would be angry if they didn't bring her back. Crenshaw studied him. Then he smiled, the worst smile Isaac had ever seen. He announced he thought Isaac had followed them on his own, that nobody knew where he was, and if they put him on the pile with the giantess, nobody would ever know what happened to either of them. He grabbed Isaac by the collar and dragged him toward the woodpile, announcing they'd get 2 for the price of 1. Isaac looked down at Adaze. She was looking back, her dark eyes filled with something new, not hope exactly, but something deeper, fiercer. She moved faster than anyone thought possible, faster than her broken body should have allowed. One enormous hand shot out and grabbed Crenshaw's ankle. She yanked, and he went down hard, dropping Isaac and the torch. The torch landed in the mud and sputtered out. Adaze pulled herself onto her knees. In the moonlight, she looked like something from a nightmare, 8 feet of shadow and rage rising from the earth like a spirit of vengeance. She told Isaac to run. Her voice was deep as thunder, rough from years of silence. She commanded him to run and not look back. The men scrambled for their weapons. Davis had a pistol out. Another reached for a knife. There was no time for debate. Isaac grabbed Adaze's hand and told her to come with him. She protested she could not run, could barely walk, and urged him to save himself. Isaac refused. He told her to lean on him, that they would go together. Now. Later, Isaac could never explain what happened next. He pulled on her hand, and she rose. She leaned on his shoulder, and somehow he did not collapse under her weight. They moved into the swamp's darkness, leaving the clearing, the men, their torches, and their murder behind. It should not have been possible. Adaze weighed over 300 pounds. Isaac was strong for his age, but not that strong. Yet something happened in that moment, something that defied physics, logic, and everything that should have been true. Maybe it was adrenaline. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was something else entirely, something immeasurable and inexplicable. All Isaac knew was they were moving through cypress trees, through knee-deep water, through darkness and danger. He could hear men shouting behind them, spreading out to search. He could hear dogs barking in the distance. But he kept moving, one step at a time, with the weight of a giant on his shoulders. They traveled all night. Isaac knew the swamp better than most. He had explored it secretly over the years, mapping its paths and waterways in his mind. He knew where the ground was solid and where it would swallow you whole. He knew where alligators nested and water moccasins hunted. He knew which direction led deeper into wilderness and which led back to the plantation. He chose deeper. Every step took them further from everything they had ever known. By dawn, they had covered nearly 5 miles. Not far enough to be safe, but far enough to rest. Isaac found a small island of high ground surrounded by water on 3 sides. A massive fallen oak provided shelter from the sun. He helped Adaze lower herself to the ground, then collapsed beside her. For a long time, neither spoke. They simply breathed, recovering from the impossible night. Finally, Adaze broke the silence. She asked why he had done that. Isaac had been asking himself the same thing. He admitted he didn't know, that he had seen them taking her away, seen her face, and couldn't just let it happen. She pointed out he could have died, he almost did. Isaac replied that so could she. She looked at him with ancient eyes and explained she had been ready to die, ready for a long time, but he was young with his whole life ahead. She wanted to know why he would risk it for someone like her. Isaac had no answer, at least not one he could put into words. He just knew that when he saw her lying in the mud, waiting for the fire, something inside him had refused to accept it. Something had said no. Not this. Not now. Not while he could still do something. He told her his mother used to share stories of people who did impossible things, who fought against darkness when everyone else gave up. He had always thought those were just stories. But that night, seeing her, he wondered if stories were true, if people really could do impossible things if they tried hard enough. Adaze was quiet a long moment. Then, for the first time in years, she laughed. It was small, rusty from disuse, but real. She told him he was a strange young man. She revealed she knew his name, she knew everyone's name. She watched and listened, even when people thought she wasn't there. She knew he could read, that he sneaked out to practice, that he hid books in the smokehouse. Isaac's blood went cold. But she assured him his secret was safe with her. He had saved her life, a debt she could never repay. The first day in the swamp was the hardest. Isaac had no supplies, no tools, no plan, only his wits and knowledge of the land. He gathered what food he could find, berries, roots, a turtle caught near the water's edge. He built a small fire using a technique he'd read about, spinning a stick against dry wood until it smoldered. It took over an hour, but the flames caught. Adaze was too weak to help. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her breathing shallow and labored. The escape had taken everything she had left. Isaac feared she might die before they reached safety. But where was safety? They were deep in the Louisiana swamp, hundreds of miles from the nearest free state. Even if they could travel, roads and rivers were watched by slave patrols. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 meant even reaching the North was no guarantee of freedom. Escaped slaves could be captured and returned from anywhere. Isaac had heard whispers about the Underground Railroad, not a real railroad, but a network of secret routes and safe houses helping enslaved people escape to Canada, where slavery was illegal. But the Underground Railroad was just a rumor to most in Louisiana. The Deep South was far from its main routes. The closest safe houses were hundreds of miles away in Missouri or Kentucky. Getting there would require crossing Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee, weeks, maybe months, hunted every step. On the second day, Adaze was strong enough to talk. She told Isaac her real story, the one she had never told anyone in America. She was born in 1825 in a village called Nquir, in the heart of Igbo land. Her father was an Obi, a chief leading a community of over 3,000. Her mother was a Dibia, a priestess communing with ancestral spirits. Adaze was their only daughter, born during an eclipse, a sign of great destiny to her people. From birth, she was marked as different. She grew faster than other children, surpassing her peers before she could walk. By her 10th birthday, she was taller than any village adult. The elder said she was blessed by the gods, chosen to be a warrior and protector. Then the slavers came. They attacked at night during a festival when village defenses were down. They came with guns, chains, and a hunger for human cargo. Adaze's father died protecting his people. Her mother was killed refusing to be separated from her daughter. Adaze was beaten unconscious and woke in chains, surrounded by strangers being marched toward the coast. The march took 3 weeks. Many died from exhaustion, disease, or despair. Those who couldn't keep up were left to die or shot. Adaze survived because of her size and strength, but she lost something on that march she would never get back, her faith in the world. The slave ship was worse. Adaze spent 2 months in the vessel's belly, chained to strangers in a space so small she couldn't stand straight. The smell was beyond description. The sounds beyond imagination. People died daily, bodies thrown overboard to sharks following the ship. Adaze survived by retreating in her mind to a place where none of this was real. In America, she was sold at auction in Charleston, South Carolina. Buyers examined her like livestock, checking her teeth and muscles, discussing her breeding potential. She was 12 years old. For the next 20 years, she was passed from owner to owner. Some were cruel, some kind in their limited way. All saw her as property, a thing to be used. She learned English but refused to forget her native tongue. She learned to work but never stopped dreaming of home. She learned to survive, though part of her died a little more each year. She had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. All were taken before their 3rd birthday, sold to other plantations, sent to lives she would never know. She tried to find them, but the slave system erased those connections. Her children were scattered across the South like seeds in the wind. She would never see them again. By the time she reached the Bellamy plantation, Adaze had given up hope. She was waiting to die. She expected to die. And then a young man appeared in the darkness and told her to run. Isaac listened without interrupting. When she finished, he wept. He had heard stories of the Middle Passage whispered late at night. But hearing it from someone who had lived it, sitting beside him, made it real as nothing else could. He told her he was sorry. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was all he had. Adaze touched his face with her enormous hand, gentle as a mother's touch. She told him he had nothing to be sorry for, he didn't do this to her. He was trying to undo it, that made him different from almost everyone she had met in this country. Isaac asked what they were going to do, how they would get to freedom. Adaze smiled. For a moment, she looked almost young again. She pointed out he was asking her, the one ready to die, while he was the one who wouldn't let her. He must have a plan. Isaac didn't have a plan, but he had something better: books. Over the years, he had read everything he could: newspapers, almanacs, novels, histories. He had read about U.S. geography, rivers, roads, cities. He had read about the Underground Railroad and its brave operators. And he had read about specific escape routes, information most enslaved people never learned. There was a path. Dangerous, long, uncertain, but it existed. Isaac explained his plan. They would go north, following rivers when possible, traveling by night, hiding by day. There were people along the way who would help, both black and white. Safe houses where runaways could rest and get supplies. If they could reach Kentucky, they could cross into Ohio, and from Ohio to Canada. Adaze looked at him with wonder. She asked if he had learned all this from books. Isaac confirmed it, adding he also learned from listening. Enslaved people talked about these things when they thought nobody was paying attention. He was always paying attention. She asked how far and how long. Isaac had calculated this in his head many times, though he never imagined making the journey. About 700 miles to the Ohio River. Traveling at night, hiding by day, maybe 15 miles per day if lucky. That was nearly 50 days, almost 2 months. Adaze pointed out she couldn't walk 15 miles a day, she could barely walk at all. Isaac replied they would go slower, rest when she needed, take as long as necessary. She warned the men would come after them with dogs, guns, and more men. They wouldn't stop until found. Isaac acknowledged this, but pointed out they had a head start and something the hunters didn't have. When she asked what, Isaac explained they had nothing to lose. The hunters had plantations, money, and reputations to protect. They couldn't spend forever chasing 2 slaves into wilderness. Eventually, they would give up. But Isaac and Adaze would never give up, because giving up meant death. Adaze studied this impossible young man who had appeared in her darkest moment and pulled her back from the edge. She had lived 32 years, traveled halfway around the world, survived horrors most couldn't imagine, and here was a 17-year-old teaching her about hope. She asked if he really believed they could do it. Isaac thought. The logical part said no. The odds were impossibly long. No supplies, weapons, or money. Hunted by men who knew the land better. Adaze could barely walk. Everything was against them. But a deeper part refused to accept those odds. That part remembered his mother's stories. It remembered the clearing where he stood up to 5 armed men. It remembered the impossible night walk through the swamp, carrying a woman who weighed twice what he did. He told her he believed they had to try, and sometimes when you tried hard enough, impossible things became possible. That afternoon, they heard the dogs. The sound came from the south, distant but closing. The baying of hounds on a scent, the most terrifying sound to a runaway. Bellamy had sent hunters. Isaac helped Adaze to her feet. She was stronger than the day before but far from healthy. Every step was an effort, every breath a struggle. They headed north into the swamp's deepest part. Isaac had read dogs lost scent trails in water, so he led them through every stream and pond they could find. The water was cold and full of hidden dangers, but better than being caught. They walked until dark, then kept walking. The dogs fell behind, confused by water. But Isaac knew they wouldn't give up easily. Professional slave hunters were paid per capture. They would follow for days, weeks if necessary. The only escape was to get so far ahead the trail went cold completely. Around midnight, they found shelter in an abandoned trapper's cabin, falling apart, barely 4 walls and a roof, but dry and hidden. They collapsed inside, too exhausted for anything but sleep. Isaac woke before dawn. Adaze still slept, her massive body curled in a corner like a child's. In sleep, she looked peaceful, almost happy. Isaac wondered what she dreamed of, her village, her family, the life she might have had. He crept outside to survey their surroundings. Swamp stretched in every direction, a maze of water, trees, and danger. But to the north, he saw something that made his heart leap, a road. A dirt track barely wide enough for a wagon. But a road. Roads led somewhere. Roads meant civilization, danger, but also opportunity. People on roads might help or turn them in. It was a gamble either way. Isaac decided. They would follow the road north but stay hidden in the trees alongside it. They would watch for travelers, try to determine who was friendly. Risky, but staying in the swamp forever wasn't an option. They needed supplies, medicine, information. They needed help. When Adaze woke, he told her his plan. She listened, then nodded slowly. She told him he was wise beyond his years. In her country, he would be destined for great things, a chief or priest. Isaac replied that in this country, he was just property. She corrected him, in this country, he was a miracle, and he should not forget that. They set out at dusk, following the tree line alongside the road. Progress was slow but steady. Adaze leaned on Isaac's shoulder, taking some weight off her failing legs. Isaac pointed out landmarks as they walked, teaching her signs of human habitation, smoke trails, cleared fields, distant lowing of cattle. Near midnight, they saw lights ahead, a small settlement, maybe a dozen buildings clustered around a crossroads. Isaac made out a general store, a church, and a blacksmith shop. Dangerous territory for runaways, but an opportunity. Isaac told Adaze to wait while he got closer. She grabbed his arm, protesting it was too dangerous. If caught, there was no escape. Isaac assured her they wouldn't catch him. He was invisible. Nobody ever noticed him. Before she could argue, he slipped into darkness. He moved through trees like a ghost, silent and unseen. Years of practice made him an expert. He could get within feet of someone without them knowing. The settlement was quiet. Most buildings were dark, occupants asleep, but light came from the church, and Isaac heard voices inside. He crept closer, pressing against the wall beneath an open window. The men inside discussed the search. A $300 reward, dead or alive, from Bellamy himself. They mentioned how hard it would be to miss an 8-foot woman, and expressed surprise she had help from the Mercer boy, who they heard was smart for a Negro and had learned to read somehow. One man observed a reading slave was worse than a runaway, a threat to the whole system. Another agreed, explaining Bellamy wanted them caught before word spread. Imagine if other slaves found out a young man and a crippled giantess had escaped right under his nose, it would give them ideas. Isaac had heard enough. He crept back to Adaze and told her what he learned. $300 was an enormous sum, bringing every bounty hunter in Louisiana down on their heads. They had to move faster, get out of the state before hunters organized a proper search. She replied she would try, but her body was failing. Isaac thought, then an idea came, crazy, desperate, probably impossible. But impossible was becoming their specialty. He explained there was a blacksmith and general store in town. If he could get in unseen, he might find something to help her, a crutch, or a cart to steal. Adaze protested it was too risky, reminding him what the men said about the search. Isaac pointed out they were looking for an 8-foot woman and a 17-year-old together. They weren't looking for a young man alone. He could be in and out before anyone knew. Adaze wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. She could barely walk. Without help, without supplies, they would never make it. The only chance was to take risks. She told him to be careful, he was the only hope she had left. Isaac slipped back toward town. Streets were empty now, the church meeting over. He made his way to the general store, finding a back window left slightly open. He squeezed through, dropping silently into a storeroom filled with goods. He worked quickly, filling a burlap sack, dried meat, hardtack, a knife, rope, matches. He also found a bottle of laudanum, a powerful painkiller that might help Aday's joints. Every item was a risk, but each might be the difference between life and death. On his way out, he spotted something that made him freeze. Hanging behind the counter was a freshly printed wanted poster with rough sketches of a giant woman and a young man. The reward was now $500, not $300. Someone had raised the stakes. Isaac tore the poster from the wall, stuffed it in his sack, climbed back out the window, and disappeared into the night. The next few days established a pattern defining their journey. They traveled at night, following roads when possible, cutting through wilderness when necessary. By day, they hid in caves, abandoned buildings, dense thickets. Isaac foraged when supplies ran low. Aday rested and recovered, her strength slowly returning. The laudanum helped, dulling joint pain, allowing her to walk further, but Isaac rationed it carefully. Addiction was common, he had seen what it could do. He gave her just enough to function, no more. They talked as they traveled. Isaac told Aday about his life on the plantation, his secret reading, his dreams of freedom. Aday told him about Eboland, her family, her people's traditions and beliefs. She taught him words in her language, he taught her American geography and history. They were teacher and student to each other, learning and growing with every mile. On the 5th day, they reached the Mississippi River. It stretched before them like an ocean, wide, brown, powerful. The far shore was barely visible through morning mist. Somewhere beyond was Mississippi, then Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio. Somewhere beyond was freedom. But first, they had to cross. Isaac had read about the Mississippi, the most important U.S. waterway, carrying goods from the northern territories to the Gulf of Mexico. Steamboats traveled it day and night. The river was watched by slave patrols looking for runaways trying to cross. There were ferries, small boats operated by people who carried passengers for a fee. Some ferry operators helped runaways for the right price, others would turn them in for the reward. They spent 2 days camped near the riverbank, hidden in a cottonwood grove. Isaac watched ferry landings, studying operators, trying to read their character from a distance. Most looked ordinary, neither good nor evil, just making a living. But one caught his attention, a black man, unusual since most operators were white. He was old, maybe 60, with gray hair and a limp. He wore simple clothes and spoke to everyone with quiet respect, whether wealthy travelers or poor farmers. Isaac watched him a full day before deciding. Something about the old man felt right. A gamble, but everything was a gamble. That night, Isaac crept down to the ferry landing. The old man sat alone by a small fire, cooking in a battered pot. Isaac stepped from shadows and cleared his throat. The old man looked up, his eyes sharp, taking in everything about Isaac in a glance. He observed Isaac was the boy they were looking for. Isaac's heart stopped. He started to deny it, but the old man held up a hand. He told Isaac not to lie, he was too old for lies. He had seen the posters, read the descriptions, a reading slave, smart as a whip, traveling with a giant woman. Not many matching those descriptions wandered Louisiana. Isaac prepared to run, but the old man calmed him, saying he hadn't said he would turn them in. He invited Isaac to sit, have some stew. The young man looked like he hadn't eaten properly in days. Isaac hesitated. Every instinct said flee, but something deeper said stay. He sat by the fire. The old man introduced himself as Abraham. He had run the ferry 30 years. He was born free, his parents were freed by their owners well before he was born. He had never been property, never worn chains or felt the whip, but he had watched his people suffer for 60 years and done what he could to help. Isaac asked if he helped runaways. Abraham laughed, saying he had been helping runaways since before Isaac's mother was born. That was how he got his limp. A slave catcher shot him in 1839 helping a family cross. They made it to Ohio, he made it to the doctor. He had walked funny ever since. Hope surged in Isaac's chest. He asked if Abraham could help them, take them across. Abraham asked about the giant first, was she real? Isaac confirmed everything, 8 feet, 1 inch. Her name was Adaze, from Africa. Sick, but strong. The bravest person he had ever met. Abraham studied Isaac's face, then asked about him. How did a young man learn to read on a Louisiana plantation? Isaac told him enough, about his mother, his secret education, the night in the swamp saving a stranger. Abraham listened without interrupting, his eyes growing brighter. When Isaac finished, Abraham nodded slowly. He said he had been doing this a long time, met many runaways, brave, scared, desperate, but never anyone like Isaac. He stood up, joints creaking, and told Isaac to bring his giant. He would take them across that night when the moon was dark. No charge. Isaac asked why he would do that for strangers. Abraham replied freedom wasn't something you buy, it was something you fight for. Anyone willing to fight as hard as Isaac and Adaze deserved all the help he could give. That night under a moonless sky, Abraham's ferry carried Isaac Mercer and Adaze across the Mississippi River, the first major crossing of their journey, the first step out of Louisiana into the unknown beyond. As they reached the far shore, Adaze looked back at the land they were leaving. Somewhere in that darkness was the plantation where she had suffered, the swamp where she had almost died, the life of pain and despair she was finally escaping. She observed they were not free yet, they had so far still to go. Isaac acknowledged this but pointed out they were closer than yesterday, and tomorrow they would be closer still. Abraham helped them ashore and pointed north. He told them to follow the river about 20 miles to a farm owned by a Quaker family named Henderson. Tell them Abraham sent them. The Hendersons would give food, shelter, and point to the next stop on the road. Isaac recognized what Abraham described, the Underground Railroad. Abraham smiled, noting Isaac really had read everything. He confirmed the railroad was real and it worked, not perfectly, not always safely, but it worked. If they followed the stations, did as told, kept their heads down and feet moving, they would make it to freedom. He had seen it happen hundreds of times. Isaac thanked him, saying he would never forget what Abraham had done. Abraham told him not to thank him, just make it count. Make their freedom mean something. That was thanks enough. They parted on the riverbank, Abraham back to his ferry, Isaac and Adaze north into Mississippi. The road ahead was long and dangerous. Still hundreds of miles from safety, still hunted by men who would kill for the reward. But they were no longer alone. They had allies now, people risking their own lives to help strangers reach freedom. With every step, they left the past further behind. The Henderson farm sat at the end of a dirt road hidden from main routes by a thick pine stand. Isaac and Adaze reached it just before dawn, bodies aching from the 20-mile walk. The farmhouse was small but well-kept, whitewashed walls and a red barn behind. Smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth and safety. Isaac approached the front door alone, leaving Adaze hidden in the tree line. He knocked 3 times, then twice, then once, a pattern Abraham taught him. The door opened to a woman in her 50s, gray hair in a severe bun, kind eyes that seemed to see right through him. He told her Abraham sent them and they needed help. The woman looked past him, scanning darkness. She asked how many. Isaac explained 2, himself and a sick woman needing rest. The woman told him to bring her inside quickly before sunrise. The Henderson family asked no questions. They provided food, water, clean clothes, and a place to sleep in their root cellar, converted into a hidden room behind a false wall. Cramped and dark, but safe. For the first time in over a week, Isaac and Adaze slept without fear. They stayed 3 days. During that time, Isaac learned more about the Underground Railroad than he ever had from books. The network was vast and intricate, stretching from the deep south to Canada. It operated through codes and signals. A lit candle in a window meant safe house, a quilt with certain patterns on a fence indicated direction, songs and fields contained hidden messages about escape routes and safe houses. The Hendersons were Quakers, members of the Religious Society of Friends. Their faith taught all people were equal in God's eyes, slavery was a sin against humanity. They had helped runaways since the 1820s, risking lives and property to ferry people to freedom. In 30 years, they had helped over 200 escape. On the 3rd night, a wagon arrived. The driver was Thomas, a white seminary student from Ohio, spending summer break working for the railroad. His job was transporting runaways from station to station, hidden under hay or produce. Thomas examined Adaze with barely concealed amazement. He noted there was room for both, but they would need extra hay to cover her. They were headed to the next station about 40 miles north. From there, someone else would take them further. The wagon journey was uncomfortable but uneventful. Thomas drove through the night, stopping only to rest horses and check on his passengers. Isaac and Adaze lay hidden under a mountain of hay, breathing through gaps, listening to the world pass by above. They heard other travelers, farmers to market, families between towns. Once, they heard the thunder of hooves as riders galloped past. Thomas tensed, ready to run, but the riders continued without stopping, just travelers in a hurry. The next station was a church in a small town Isaac never learned the name of. The pastor was a black man, a former slave who had escaped 20 years earlier and returned south to help others find freedom. He sheltered them in the church basement 2 days, then passed them to the next conductor. And so it continued, station to station, conductor to conductor. They made their way north through Mississippi into Tennessee. Each stop brought new faces, new stories, new reminders they were not alone. There were white abolitionists risking prison and death to help strangers. Free black people who could have lived comfortably but chose to fight for enslaved brothers and sisters. Former slaves who had made the journey themselves and now dedicated their lives to helping others do the same. Isaac learned something important during these weeks. The world was not simply divided into good and bad, slavery supporters and opposers. The world was complicated. There were white slave owners who treated enslaved people with kindness, and white non-owners who hated black people with burning passion. There were black people who escaped and never looked back, and black people who risked everything to help those still in chains. What mattered, Isaac realized, was not what you were born as, but what you chose to do. Every person they met on the railroad had made a choice to fight against an evil system, even when it cost them dearly. That choice defined who they were. Adaze grew stronger as they traveled. Rest and regular food restored some vitality. She could walk longer distances, though she still tired easily. Joint pain lessened, partly from laudanum, mostly from hope. For the first time in 20 years, she had something to live for. She told Isaac more stories during long nights. She described her people's gods, powerful spirits controlling nature and guiding human destiny. She explained rituals and ceremonies marking life's passages from birth to death. She spoke of her village's warriors, men and women trained from childhood to protect their community. She told Isaac in her country, a young man like him would be celebrated, his intelligence, courage, ability to see what others missed. These were gifts from the gods. He would be trained as a leader, perhaps a king. Isaac replied they were not in her country, they were in America. In America, he was nothing but property. Adaze corrected him firmly. He was not property and never had been. Property cannot think, dream, or love. He did all these things. This country's laws might call him property, but those laws were wrong. One day they would change. She might not live to see it, but he would. He would live to see a day when no one in America was property. When that day came, she wanted him to remember he was always free, in heart, in soul. Chains were on his body, not his spirit. They crossed into Kentucky in early October, nearly a month after escaping Louisiana. Leaves changed color, painting hills red and gold. Air was crisp and clean, carrying winter's promise. They were less than 100 miles from the Ohio River now, less than 100 miles from freedom. But the closer to freedom, the more dangerous the journey. Kentucky was a slave state bordering free territory. Slave catchers patrolled roads day and night, watching for runaways trying to make the final crossing. Rewards for capture were highest here, where success was almost within reach. Many runaways came this far only to be caught within sight of the promised land. The Kentucky station was different, not a farm or church, but a cave hidden in hills outside a town called Maysville. The conductor was Harriet, a former slave who had escaped Maryland 15 years earlier and made over a dozen trips back south to guide others to freedom. She was small and fierce, with whip scars on her back and a pistol on her hip she was not afraid to use. Harriet acknowledged they had come a long way. Louisiana to Kentucky was no small journey. Most didn't make it half that far. Isaac explained they had help from good people along the way. Harriet agreed good people were the only reason any made it. But she warned good people could only do so much. The last stretch was hardest. The river was watched. Catchers knew all crossing points. They had to be smart and lucky. She studied Adaze with a critical eye, recognizing her as the giantess Tess she had heard about. She reported there was now a $1,000 reward on Adaze's head. Isaac was stunned. $1,000 was more than most earned in a lifetime. Harriet explained word spread fast when something unusual happened. A giant woman and a young man outsmarting slave catchers all the way from Louisiana was the kind of story that made planters nervous. They wanted them caught and made an example, to show other slaves escape was impossible. Adaze pointed out they had escaped, they were there. Harriet smiled grimly and corrected her, they were not escaped yet. They wouldn't be escaped until standing on free soil with no one chasing them. And right now, a lot of people were chasing them. She was right. Over the next few days, they saw evidence of the hunt everywhere. Wanted posters with their descriptions nailed to trees and fence posts. Armed men patrolled roads, stopping travelers to check papers. Dogs were brought from as far as Virginia, specially trained to track runaways across any terrain. Harriet kept them hidden in the cave, venturing out only at night for information and supplies. She had contacts throughout the area, free black people and sympathetic whites passing news of hunters' movements. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse, stakes life and death. On their 5th night in the cave, Harriet returned with troubling news. The man leading the search was Silas Crenshaw, a professional catcher who had come from Louisiana specifically to find them. Isaac's blood ran cold. He knew that name. Crenshaw was the Bellamy plantation overseer who tried to burn Adaze in the swamp. Harriet explained Crenshaw had been tracking them the whole way, following their trail station by station. He was good, they said he had never lost a runaway he set his mind to catching. Adaze had gone very still. Her face was unreadable, but something burned in her eyes, old, deep, dangerous. She said quietly she knew more about Crenshaw than he knew about her. Isaac asked what she meant. She was silent a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. She revealed Silas Crenshaw and she had the same father. Isaac stared in disbelief. She explained Crenshaw's father was a Virginia planter named William Crenshaw, who owned the plantation where she was first sold after arriving from Africa. He was cruel, violent, drunk most of the time. He raped her mother within a week of arrival. Adaze was born 9 months later. Isaac understood. Silas was her half-brother. Same blood. He was the master's son, raised in the big house with fine clothes and education. She was the slave's daughter, raised in quarters with chains and whips. Same father, different fate. Isaac asked if Crenshaw knew, if he knew she was his sister. Adaze laughed bitterly. He had always known. As children, before she was sold away, they lived on the same plantation, saw each other daily. He knew who she was. He knew what his father did to her mother. And he hated her for it. Her existence was proof of his father's sin. Every time he looked at her, he saw the truth about his family. Isaac asked if that was why Crenshaw tried to kill her in the swamp. Adaze confirmed he had been trying to kill her for 20 years. Every time she was sold, every time moved to a new plantation, he found a way to follow, appearing as an overseer or hired hand, always watching, waiting. He once told her he wouldn't rest until she was dead, until no evidence remained of his father's deed. Isaac understood now why Crenshaw was so eager to burn Adaze. It wasn't just money or property. It was personal, erasing a shameful truth, destroying a living reminder of his father's crimes. Isaac insisted they had to go that night, before Crenshaw found them. Harriet shook her head. River crossings were all watched. Crenshaw had men at every point between there and Cincinnati. They would walk into a trap. Isaac replied they would find another way. There had to be another way. They planned through the night. Harriet knew the territory better than anyone, every path, stream, and hiding place within 50 miles. She drew maps in dirt, explaining options and risks. Only one route might work, a dangerous path through backcountry bringing them to the river at an unguarded point. Harriet warned it was rough terrain, hills and hollows, dense forest, no trails. 3 days to cover a normal one-day journey. And if hunters picked up their trail, nowhere to hide. Isaac insisted hunters wouldn't pick up their trail. They had made it this far, they would make it the rest of the way. They set out at midnight, leaving the cave, heading into wilderness. Harriet guided the first few miles, showing landmarks, giving final instructions. Then she embraced them both and disappeared into darkness, whispering God would speed them and she would see them on the other side. The next 3 days were the hardest of the entire journey. Terrain was brutal as Harriet warned. They climbed steep hills, descended into shadowy hollows. They waded streams, crawled through thorn thickets. They slept in the open, huddled together for warmth as October nights grew colder. A day struggled with every step. Rough ground was agony on damaged joints. Several times she fell, and Isaac had to help her up. But she never complained, never asked to stop. She kept moving forward, one painful step at a time, driven by determination beyond survival. On the second night, they heard dogs in the distance, baying hounds on a scent, the sound haunting their journey from the beginning. Crenshaw had found their trail. Isaac quickened their pace, pushing harder than ever. They abandoned the planned route, heading straight for the river, no longer caring about stealth or caution. Speed was all that mattered now, speed, luck, and stubborn refusal to give up. They reached the Ohio River on the morning of the third day. It stretched before them like a silver ribbon, perhaps a quarter-mile wide, flowing quietly in early light. On the far shore was Ohio. Free soil. Safety. But between them and freedom stood Silas Crenshaw. He emerged from the tree line with a dozen men at his back. They were armed with rifles and pistols, faces grim with purpose. Dogs strained at leashes, barking frantically at their prey. Crenshaw was tall, lean, weathered, with pale eyes holding no mercy. He walked toward them slowly, savoring the moment, a smile on thin lips. He announced it was the end of the road. They had given him a good chase, better than most. But it was over now. Isaac stepped in front of Adaze as if his body could shield her. He urged Crenshaw to let them go, they were almost free. Just let them walk across that river. Crenshaw laughed. Did Isaac know how much money he had spent tracking them, how many miles traveled? He declared he had been chasing Adaze 20 years. He wouldn't let her go when this close to finishing it. Isaac told him she was his sister, his own blood. The smile vanished from Crenshaw's face. He demanded to know who told Isaac that. Isaac replied Adaze told him everything, about Crenshaw's father, what he did, why Crenshaw had hunted her all these years. Crenshaw's face twisted with rage. He denied she was his sister, calling her an animal, a thing, his father's shame made flesh. He would erase that shame once and for all. He raised his rifle, aiming at Adaze's chest. What happened next would be remembered in the region for generations. Some called it a miracle. Others called it madness. But all witnesses agreed they had never seen anything like it. Adaze moved. Not slowly, painfully, like a sick woman who could barely walk. She moved like the warrior she was born to be, like the daughter of chiefs and priestesses, like a force of nature no mortal man could stop. She grabbed Isaac and threw him toward the river. He sailed through air, landing in shallow water near shore, too shocked to cry out. Then she turned to face the men who had come to kill her. Crenshaw fired. The bullet struck her shoulder, spinning her half around, but she did not fall. She lunged forward, grabbed the rifle from his hands, snapped it in two like a dry twig. Another man fired. Another bullet struck her side. Still, she did not fall. She fought like a demon, an avenging angel, something from old legends of warriors who could not be killed by ordinary weapons. Men went down before her like wheat before a scythe. Bones broke. Blood flowed. Screams filled the air. Isaac watched from the water, frozen with horror and awe. He wanted to help, but couldn't move. All he could do was watch a day's fight her final battle. It lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, 12 men lay on the riverbank. 9 would never rise again. 3 crawled away into trees, 2 broken to walk, lucky to be alive. Silas Crenshaw was a survivor. He lay on his back, both legs shattered, staring up at the woman who had destroyed his men with bare hands. Blood ran down his face from a gash on his forehead. Pale eyes wide with terror. A daze stood over him, breathing hard, body riddled with wounds that should have killed her. Blood soaked her clothes, dripped onto ground. She looked like death itself come to claim what was owed. She told him he had hunted her 20 years. He tried to destroy her because she reminded him of what his father was. But he could not destroy truth. He could not erase shame by killing the innocent. His father's sin was written in his own blood. Every time he looked in a mirror, he would see it. Every time he closed his eyes, he would remember this moment. That was her gift to him. That was her revenge. She raised her foot to crush his skull. Then she stopped. Slowly, she lowered her foot and stepped back. She told him she would not kill him. He wasn't worth the stain on her soul. He would live with what he was. He would live with what he had done. And every day for the rest of his miserable life, he would know she could have ended him. And she chose mercy instead. She turned away, walked toward the river. Each step was slower than the last. Light faded from her eyes, but she kept walking, moving toward water, toward freedom, toward Isaac. She reached the shore and collapsed. Isaac caught her as she fell, though her weight drove him to his knees. He held her in shallow water, her blood mixing with current flowing toward Ohio. She whispered for him to go, to swim. It wasn't far. He could make it. Isaac refused to leave without her. She smiled, and despite everything, it was the most beautiful thing Isaac had ever seen. She told him he had already saved her. That night in the swamp, he had saved her soul. He gave her hope when she had none left. He gave her a reason to live. Because of him, she died free. Because of him, she died human. Isaac insisted she wasn't going to die, they would cross together, they would make it. She told him she was already across, she was already home. She reached up, touched his face with a bloody hand. She asked him to remember her, to tell her story, tell them about a days of Nqueer, daughter of chiefs, sister of warriors. Tell them she fought. Tell them she never stopped fighting, not until the very end. Her eyes closed. Her breathing slowed. And there in the waters of the Ohio River, just yards from free soil, a days died in the arms of the young men who had saved her. Isaac held her a long time. He wept until no tears left. He screamed at the sky until his voice was gone. He begged God, begged a day's ancestral spirits, begged anyone listening to bring her back. But death does not bargain. Death does not negotiate. When death comes, there is no arguing. Finally, Isaac did the only thing he could do. He started swimming. The river was cold, current strong. But Isaac was desperate. He fought water with everything he had, driven by fury that would not let him stop. Behind him, on the Kentucky shore, Silas Crenshaw lay broken among bodies of his men. Before him, growing closer with every stroke, was Ohio. He reached the far shore as the sun set. He dragged himself onto the bank and lay gasping, too exhausted to move. He had made it. He was on free soil. He was safe. But he did not feel free. He did not feel safe. He felt empty, hollow, as if something essential had been torn out of him and left behind on the other side of the river. He walked north through darkness, following roads Harriet described. Around midnight, he reached a farmhouse with a candle burning in the window. He knocked on the door and collapsed into the arms of strangers who answered. They were Underground Railroad conductors. They had been expecting him. Word traveled fast along the network. They knew about the giant woman and young men trying to cross into Ohio. They took him in, fed him, gave clean clothes and a warm bed. But when they asked about Adaze, Isaac could not answer. He could not find words to describe what happened on the riverbank. All he could do was shake his head and weep. He stayed with the family 2 weeks, recovering strength. They asked no questions about his past, made no demands about his future. When ready to leave, they gave money, supplies, and directions to the next station on the road to Canada. But Isaac did not go to Canada. He had a different destination. He went to Cincinnati, Ohio's largest city, with a community of free black people and escaped slaves. He found work as a warehouse laborer, saving every penny. He found teachers to continue his education, learning to read and write far beyond self-taught levels. He found abolitionists fighting to end slavery and joined their cause with all his young heart's passion. Years passed. Isaac grew from a young man into adulthood. He watched the nation tear itself apart over slavery, as politicians argued, compromised, and failed to solve the fundamental injustice. He watched war finally come as Union and Confederacy clashed in battles killing more Americans than all previous wars combined. In 1863, when President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation and allowed black men to serve in the Union Army, Isaac enlisted. He was 21, tall and strong, hardened by years of labor and loss. He joined the 54th Massachusetts Infantry, one of the first black regiments in the U.S. military. The 54th Massachusetts formed March 1863, 2 months after Lincoln's proclamation took effect. The regiment was led by white officers, as required by law, but soldiers were all black men, some freeborn Northerners, others escaped slaves from the South. All fought for something larger than themselves, the destruction of slavery and the promise of a new America. Isaac trained at Camp Meigs outside Boston, learning to march, shoot, and fight as a unit. He discovered a natural talent for soldiering. Years of invisibility taught patience and observation. Time on the Underground Railroad taught endurance and courage. Memory of Adaze taught him some things were worth dying for. The 54th Massachusetts saw its first major action July 18, 1863, at the Battle of Fort Wagner. Fort Wagner was a Confederate stronghold on Morris Island, South Carolina, guarding the approach to Charleston Harbor. Union command decided taking the fort was crucial to capturing Charleston itself, the birthplace of secession and symbolic heart of the Confederacy. The assault was a disaster. The 54th led the charge across 600 yards of open beach under withering Confederate fire. Men fell by dozens, scores, hundreds. The regiment lost nearly half its strength in less than an hour, including commanding officer Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, killed leading his men over the fort's walls. Isaac was among those who made it to the walls. He climbed the parapet, fought hand-to-hand with Confederate soldiers in darkness. He killed men, watched friends die beside him. He was wounded twice, in the arm and leg, but kept fighting until the order to retreat. The Union failed to take Fort Wagner that night. But the 54th Massachusetts courage changed the war's course. Their sacrifice proved black soldiers could fight as bravely as white soldiers, that they were willing to die for their country and freedom. In months following, nearly 200,000 black men enlisted in the Union Army, many citing the 54th as inspiration. Isaac recovered from his wounds and returned to duty. He fought in skirmishes and sieges across the South. He saw friends die beside him, enemies fall before him. He learned what it meant to fight for something larger than himself, something worth dying for. Through it all, he never forgot Adaze. He carried her memory like a talisman, a reminder of true courage. When fear threatened to overwhelm, he remembered her standing on the riverbank, facing a dozen armed men with bare hands. When despair crept in during darkest hours, he remembered her smile as she lay dying, at peace with herself and the world. The war ended April 1865 with the Confederate surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. Slavery was over. Chains were broken. 4 million people who had been property were now free, at least under law. Isaac was 23. He had survived war, survived the impossible journey from Louisiana to Ohio, survived everything life threw at him. Now he had one final task. He went back to Kentucky. Silas Crenshaw had survived the riverbank battle but never recovered. His legs were shattered beyond repair. He spent the rest of the war in a wheelchair, bitter and broken, watching the world he knew collapse around him. The plantation he hoped to inherit was destroyed by Union troops. The fortune he counted on evaporated in defeat's chaos. By 1865, he lived in a rundown Maysville boarding house, a shell of the man he once was. Isaac found him there, sitting on the porch in his wheelchair, staring at nothing. The pale eyes that once burned with hatred were now dull and empty. The lean body that once radiated menace was wasted and weak. Isaac stood before him in his Union uniform, a soldier of the victorious army, a free man in a nation that had finally chosen freedom. He asked if Crenshaw remembered him. Crenshaw looked up slowly. Recognition flickered in his eyes, then fear. He identified Isaac as the reading slave. Isaac corrected him. His name was Isaac Mercer. He was there when Crenshaw tried to burn a daze. He was there when she broke Crenshaw's legs and left him alive. And he was there now to finish what she started. Crenshaw's hands trembled on the wheelchair arms. He looked around for help, but no one was there. The boarding house was empty, streets quiet. They were alone. Isaac reached into his coat, pulled out a piece of paper, old, worn, folded many times over many years. He unfolded it carefully, held it up for Crenshaw to see. It was the 1859 wanted poster with rough sketches of a giant woman and a young man, offering $1,000 for their capture. Isaac let the poster fall into Crenshaw's lap. The broken man stared at it, face pale as death. Isaac stood there a long moment, looking down at the men who haunted his nightmares for 6 years. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, dreamed of revenge, justice, making Crenshaw pay for everything. He had carried a pistol all the way from Cincinnati, loaded and ready, waiting for this confrontation. But standing there, looking at the broken creature in the wheelchair, Isaac felt something unexpected, pity. Crenshaw had spent his entire life running from truth about his father, about himself, about the evil he chose to embrace. And in the end, that running led nowhere. He was alone, crippled, despised, forgotten. He had lost everything he valued, and would spend remaining years trapped in that broken body with nothing but memories and shame. Isaac realized killing Crenshaw would be mercy. It would end his suffering, release him from the prison of his own making. And Adaze had not chosen mercy for that reason. She chose mercy because Crenshaw wasn't worth the cost of vengeance. Isaac put the pistol away. He told Crenshaw Adaze had spared his life on the riverbank. She could have killed him but chose not to. She said he wasn't worth the stain on her soul. For 6 years, Isaac wondered if she made the right choice. Now he knew she had. He told Crenshaw he wasn't going to kill him either. But he wanted Crenshaw to know something, Adaze won. She died free, on her own terms. Her story would be remembered long after Crenshaw was forgotten. People would tell children about the giant woman who fought her way to freedom. Nobody would tell children about Silas Crenshaw. Isaac turned and walked away. Behind him, Crenshaw sat in silence, the wanted poster clutched in trembling hands. That was the last time Isaac saw Silas Crenshaw. The former overseer died 3 years later, alone in the same boarding house, of causes no one recorded. His grave was unmarked, his name forgotten, his legacy nothing but dust. Isaac Mercer lived another 50 years. He became a teacher, then a principal, then a community leader. He married Sarah, a former slave from Virginia. They had 4 children. He told his children about Adaze, and they told theirs, and those children told theirs after them. The story passed through generations, changing a little with each telling but keeping the essential truth at its heart. In his final years, Isaac wrote down the story of his escape with Adaze. He wanted it to survive after he was gone, so future generations would know her sacrifice and achievement. He titled the manuscript The Giant of Nquir, a true account of courage and freedom. The manuscript was lost for years, passing through collectors' and historians' hands who didn't recognize its significance. It was rediscovered in 1947 in a Cincinnati attic that had once been an Underground Railroad stop. Historians verified its authenticity and published it in 1952, nearly a century after the events described. The story of Isaac Mercer and the Days became part of the larger story of American resistance to slavery. It was taught in schools, told in churches, cited by civil rights leaders as an example of courage against impossible odds. It reminded people freedom is never given, it must be fought for, suffered for, sometimes died for. Isaac died in 1909 at age 67. He was buried in a Cincinnati cemetery beside his wife Sarah, who had passed 2 years earlier. His tombstone bore a simple inscription he chose himself: he stood up. Those 3 words captured everything that mattered about Isaac Mercer's life. He was born into slavery with no rights, no freedom, no future. But when he saw injustice, he didn't look away. When he saw suffering, he didn't turn his back. When he saw a woman led to her death, he stood up. That choice, made in a moment of impossible courage, changed everything. It saved a life, preserved a story, proved the human spirit cannot be chained, no matter what laws, customs, or cruelties try to bind it. A Days never reached Ohio's free soil. Her body lies somewhere on the Kentucky shore in an unmarked grave long forgotten. But her spirit crossed that river 1,000 times over, carried in the hearts of everyone who heard her story and was inspired by her sacrifice. She was a Days of Queer, daughter of chiefs, sister of warriors. She was stolen from home, stripped of humanity, subjected to horrors no person should endure. But she never stopped fighting. She never stopped hoping. And in the end, she proved freedom is not a place you reach, it is a choice you make. Isaac Mercer understood that lesson better than anyone. He carried it the rest of his life and passed it to everyone he met. He taught his students they were not defined by circumstances but by choices. He taught his children courage is not the absence of fear but the decision to act despite fear. He taught all who would listen that impossible things become possible when ordinary people refuse to accept injustice. The world Isaac and Days were born into no longer exists. Slavery is abolished. Laws defining human beings as property are swept away. But the struggle for freedom continues in new forms, new places, against new enemies and old hatreds. The story of the giant woman and the reading slave reminds us where we came from. It reminds us what our ancestors endured and achieved. It reminds us progress is not inevitable, freedom must be defended in every generation. And it reminds us that sometimes, when all seems lost, when darkness closes in and hope fades, someone stands up. Someone refuses to accept the unacceptable. Someone chooses to fight even when fighting seems futile. That is the legacy of Isaac Mercer and the Days of Queer. That is the lesson they left for all of us. They stood up.